After this incident, the one with Vitachuco, the Spaniards marched farther north into Florida. A native De Soto took earlier as a prisoner told them of a city to the north in what is now South Carolina called Cofitachequi, where the chief was a woman who had lots of gold and pearls. De Soto and his men marched on, passing through what is now Georgia and into what is now north central South Carolina. There they met La Señora de Cofitachequi, the Lady of Cofitachequi. At first, the Lady of Cofitachequi was friendly, allowing them to stay in her village. As it turned out, she had very little gold, but she did have some pearls. She gave some of these pearls to the Spaniards as gifts. Later, however, De Soto arrested the Lady of Cofitachequi, held her hostage, and marched on. We cannot be certain what happened to the Lady of Cofitachequi, but according to some historians, she stayed with them for a time, and one day, when De Soto and his men were not looking, she took her opportunity to escape through the woods. Unfamiliar with the land, the Spaniards could not track the Lady of Cofitachequi down, and they never saw her again. De Soto and his men went on a trek north and west through what is now Georgia and South Carolina to the edge of the Blue Ridge Mountains. They passed through territory controlled by the Mississippians. Take a look at this map, and if you look at the red line, that is showing you the journey or the trek that De Soto and his men took. And as before, the stars represent battles with Native Americans. Everywhere they went, they looked for gold, but had very little success. The De Soto expedition eventually reached the area now known as Alabama, where De Soto and his men fought one of their biggest battles. They killed more than 2,000 Mississippians. Only 22 of De Soto's men were killed, but about 200 were injured, including De Soto himself. The Spanish also lost many of their horses. By November of 1540, the De Soto expedition had entered into Mississippian territory in northeastern Mississippi. They spent the winter in an abandoned native village. Eventually, the Mississippians attacked, firing flaming arrows. The Spanish escaped only because their stampeding horses scared off the attacking natives. With all of the constant marching and fighting they were experiencing, De Soto's men grew very tired and were ready to go home. They became convinced that there was very little gold to be found in these parts of America. Some of them began to plan a mutiny against De Soto. De Soto, however, did not want to give up and go home empty-handed. He pushed his men on. They marched and fought their way west. In May of 1541, they reached the mighty Mississippi River. De Soto and his men did not let that stop them. They constructed makeshift flatboats, and under the cover of night, to hide from the attacking natives, used the boats to ferry the men and the horses across the wide river. After De Soto and his men crossed the Mississippi River, they explored what is now Arkansas. Near what is now Camden, Arkansas, they met natives who lived in teepees and hunted buffalo. De Soto decided to spend the winter there. By the spring of 1542, even De Soto was becoming demoralized. De Soto had found almost no gold. He had lost many of his men, and his horses could barely walk. His translator, Juan Ortiz, had died, and the other translators were having trouble understanding the local natives. All of these terrible events together became the last straw. De Soto came down with a bad fever. He spent his days in bed, but the fever got worse. De Soto died on May 21st, 1542. His men attached stones to his body and tossed it into the Mississippi River. According to legend, because De Soto had told the Native Americans he was immortal or able to live forever, his men sank his body in the Mississippi River so that the Native Americans would not discover De Soto's body and realize this was a lie. The remaining men of the De Soto expedition made their way back to the Gulf of Mexico, where they built 7 boats. In July of 1543, they floated along the Gulf Coast, past Texas, and eventually made their way back to the Spanish outposts in Mexico. Throughout this difficult journey, the men on the De Soto expedition were the first known Europeans to explore the southeastern United States, north and west of present-day Florida. On this slide here, I have filled out part of the graphic organizer, and you are welcome to pause and add some notes to yours if you would like, or just to watch and listen. So your short right is going to be what is showing here up at the top to describe the interaction between Hernando de Soto and his men and the Native Americans they encountered. So first, we were to think about what were the motivating factors for Hernando de Soto. Why did he choose to explore America? So, to get rich, to conquer Florida and other lands for Spain, and to find gold, which, as we just heard, they did not find very much. So, some examples of the interactions with Native Americans. Here are some examples that I found, and these are definitely not the only ones. You can add to it, you can leave some off, but these are the ones that jumped out at me. So, first, that some tribes would adopt Europeans, as was the case with Juan Ortiz. Some Europeans took the natives as prisoner or slaves. For example, De Soto took Chief Vitachuco and the Lady of Cofitachequi prisoner. We heard that De Soto's strategy was to be vicious early on. He thought if he was horribly vicious, it would discourage the natives from attacking him and his men. There was a large battle in Alabama where 2,000 Mississippians were killed. Natives sometimes abandoned their villages, so we heard they were afraid of the Spanish coming sometimes, and they would leave their villages behind. And the natives would sometimes attack Europeans. As you saw on the maps, there were several stars that showed where there were battles with the natives, and you heard a few stories about that as well. At the bottom, it asks us to list some adjectives that describe their interaction with Native Americans. So a few that popped out at me, or actually a couple of these came from you guys the last time we discussed this, were cruel, unfair, mean, vicious, aggressive. Are those the only ones? Of course not, but you can add your own, or you can share some of the ideas written here. If you'd like, you may pause to have some time to write down the notes, or you may continue for our word work. So the word that we focused on today was disastrous, and you heard in the read aloud, his name was Juan Ortiz, and he had been a member of the disastrous Narvaez expedition. So something that is disastrous is unsuccessful and often causes frustration, great suffering, or loss. Here is the word used in a sentence. My disastrous attempt at baking a cake resulted in a dry and inedible dessert. So have you ever heard about or seen a disastrous event? What was it? Be sure to use the word disastrous when you tell about it. Let's go over some examples together. I'm going to read you a phrase describing an event, and I want you to think, is this an example of something that is disastrous or not? Spending the day with your best friend. That is not disastrous. A powerful earthquake. Yes, that is disastrous. A case of the giggles. That is not disastrous, unless it's during a lesson and you're supposed to be quiet, right? How about an oil spill in an ocean? Yes, that is disastrous. Columbus finding the fort burned to the ground upon his return to Hispaniola? Yes, that might be disastrous. The last day of school before summer vacation? That would not be disastrous. A species of an organism becoming extinct? Yes, that is disastrous. 2,000 Mississippians being killed? Yes, that would also be disastrous.